Hello, and welcome to Learning the Social Sciences. Today we're going to be continuing the lecture series on America's war in Vietnam, focusing on the year 1973. On January 22nd, 1973, former President Johnson died in Texas at the age of 64. The draft ended on January 27th, 1973, as the Selective Service announced the end to the draft and instituted an all volunteer military, which the United States still operates under today. We have the Paris Peace Accords going on also. On the same day the draft ended, President Nixon signed the Paris Peace Accords, ending direct U.S. involvement in Vietnam. The North Vietnamese accepted a ceasefire, but as U.S. troops depart Vietnam, North Vietnamese military officials continue to plot to overtake South Vietnam. North Vietnam celebrated the signing of the Paris Peace Accords as a victory. The Vietnamese Revolution has achieved several important gains, but the struggle of our people must continue to consolidate those victories to build a peaceful, unified, independent, democratic, and strong Vietnam. That was a quote from them. The United States media praised Nixon and Kissinger for their achievement of peace with honor. Now, in South Vietnam, few believed that the agreement would lead to a lasting peace, and a lot of concerns were being raised constantly. Now, Operation Homecoming comes in starting in February. On February 12th, we witnessed the first C 141A flight of U.S. prisoners of war leaving Hanoi for Saigon. The first flight contained 40 prisoners. The flights continued until April 4th, when the last of the 591 Americans were freed. And so this is a huge event. Alvarez, who has been there for years upon years upon years as the first prisoner after his plane was shot down, is finally going to be released. And other people like McCain are eventually going to be released. It is a huge thing for the United States and for the families that have been highly concerned about the well being of their family members as they were prisoners of war. So the last American combat troops left Vietnam on March 29th, as per the Paris Peace Accords, and we have MAC-V being closed. Fewer than 250 U.S. military personnel remained in Vietnam at the U.S. Embassy in Saigon, and about 8,500 civilians working for the U.S. government remained in southern South Vietnam. An official publication of North Vietnam summed up the pluses and minuses for the peace agreement. On the positive side for North Vietnam, the U.S. had ended its military operations in both South and North Vietnam and had begun to remove mines from coastal waters of North Vietnam. On the negative side, the ceasefire had not been effective. Although combat was not as intense as before, the U.S. military continued to support South Vietnam by turning over its military bases and providing weapons and other military material to South Vietnam, and also funding. So the troops might be leaving, but the helicopter remains. The International Commission of Control of Supervision, created to supervise the Paris Peace Accords, reported that the ceasefire has not been effective, with numerous violations by South Vietnam, North Vietnam, and the Viet Cong. None of the Vietnamese parties wanted the kind of peace promised by the agreement. South Vietnam submitted paperwork stating that North Vietnam had 4,595 infractions. The U.S. Embassy stated that 30,000 troops had left South Vietnam for North Vietnam, were refitted, and ready at any time to come back across the border for an invasion. They knew that this peace was not going to be enduring. So we have the Case Church Amendment. The U.S. Congress signed a law prohibiting further U.S. military activity in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia after August 15th, 1973. This ended direct U.S. military involvement in the Vietnam War, although the U.S. continued to provide military equipment and economic support to the South Vietnamese government. And they knew they had to continue to do this, or South Vietnam would fall quickly. Now, thinking about America leaving the war, Operation End Sweep finished clearing out the mines of North Vietnamese coastal waters on July 27th, 1973. The last B 52 bombing occurred in Cambodia on August 15th. The U.S. Congress passed then the War Powers Resolution of 1973, stating that the president can only send U.S. armed forces into action abroad only by authorization of Congress or if the United States is already under attack or serious threat. The War Powers Resolution required the president to notify Congress within 48 hours of committing armed forces to military action and forbid armed forces from remaining for more than 60 days, with a further 30-day withdrawal period, without an authorization of the use of military force or a declaration of war. The resolution was passed by two-thirds of Congress, overriding a presidential veto. Nixon could do nothing about it. So, when we're looking at 1973 by year end, only 50 U.S. military personnel remained in Vietnam. South Vietnamese armed forces totaled 1.1 million troops, however. 233,748 South Vietnamese had been killed in combat up to this date. Yes, we are in America and we do focus on the American casualties, but it is also good to note what the casualty numbers are and the killed in action numbers are in the country itself with the South Vietnamese. So this has been 1973. Join us for our next lecture on 1974 with America's war in Vietnam. Thank you. Bye bye.